Hey guys, welcome back. Thank you for watching my last video. And yeah, I would definitely appreciate any sort of input that you guys can have. One thing I realized that I forgot to mention was, so I was talking about, the last video was talking about essentially the 70, but also the reason why, my evidence of why not all the 70 were required to have been born by the time of the move to Egypt. So recap, Genesis 46. My evidence was the family of Judah, which is covered in Genesis 38, I believe it was, and that whole life of and Onan dying, and then Shelah not getting Tamar, but then Tamar tricking Judah to have kids with them, and then those kids had kids, which are those kids, all of those are in the list of 70, and how that couldn't fit in the timeline of leading up to the entry into Exodus, or leading up into the entry of Egypt. One thing that I failed to point out though, which is a real killer, like I left it at like, okay, if each child wasn't born with their father at the age of 12, which again, that's bare minimum, that's not realistic at all. But let's just say that they were all born at 12, then it would have been possible for like a year before the move to Egypt. But with that all considered, in Genesis 38 verse 1, it says, right at the very top, and I missed this when I was commenting on the last one, and it came about at that time. What time? And it's like that Judah departed from his brothers and visited a certain Adulamite. That's where he met the daughter of Shua, or the daughter of Shua. So about at that time, if you look at the previous chapter, that's when Joseph was sold into slavery. And we know from we know that Joseph was 17 years old. Genesis chapter 37 verse 2. These are the records of the generations of Jacob. Joseph, when 17 years of age, was pasturing the flock, blah blah blah, and that's they beat him up, ripped his tunic, whatever it is, dipped it in blood, sold him to the whatever that caravan was that was going past them, Ishmaelites, yes, caravan of Ishmaelites, which was going to Egypt. So essentially that whole trail. So after all of that, or like about at that time, and it came about at that time that Judah departed. So so we know that then Joseph was 17, and if Jacob was roughly, or if Judah was 4 years older. So because of that chart that I showed you where Jacob was born, oh my goodness, Judah was born when Jacob, his father, was 86, and Joseph was born when his father was 90. And with that 90, there's some debate about that, but I have a reason for that, so just hold off on that. It doesn't really change anything for this whole argument though, but it's a whole other area in terms of when they entered Egypt. So but the time from the birth till the entry into Egypt doesn't change. So because a lot of people would say he's 91. So Judah, so then that pushes his age from 12, minimum age 12 to have up to 22, because he, at that time, 4 years older would be 21, and then 22 is when he'd have and then and I was saying at bare minimum it'd be he at the entry into Egypt, Judah would have been 44, and the absolute minimum that Perez could have had Hezron was 43. But now if we push it forward by 10 years, there's no way that Hezron could even possibly be born in Canaan. It'd have to be Egypt. So and I pointed out how that the scriptures specify that and Onan died in Canaan. And I think that's why it specifies that. There's also another point where it specifies that someone's mother the mother of children was a Canaanite, which, back to Genesis 46, verse 10. The sons of Simeon, Jemuel and Jamin, Ohad, Jachin, Zohar, and Shual, the sons of a Canaanite woman. Stuff like that. Like, it's like the little details that they're there for a reason. So it's good to pay attention to those. So also another thing that I didn't really talk about is why the names like Hezron and Hamul and Kohath, why they were mentioned in this list if they weren't even born. Why does it sound like that they were all born without actually even being born yet? Like, so let's see, let's look at a specific verse. I think it's verse 8, chapter 46, verse 8. Now these are the names of the sons of Israel, Jacob and his sons who went to Egypt. And then it goes on talking about Reuben, and then next Simeon, next Levi, next Judah, next Zebulun. So it very much sounds like that. And I think there's even like a later verse. But something to notice as well is that I don't think I've ever really heard anyone explain there's a number 66 that's mentioned here. If we go down to verse 26, it says, all the persons belonging to Jacob who came to Egypt, his direct descendants, not including the wives of Jacob's sons, were 66 persons in all. And then the next verse is talking about Joseph and his 2 sons. And it adds 4 there, which is interesting. So in the next verse, verse 26, and the sons of Joseph who were born to him in Egypt were 2. All the persons of the house of Jacob who came to Egypt were 70. So Joseph, Manasseh, and Ephraim is addition of 3. Some people would argue that in that group of 70, they're including Jacob. I don't think so, because these are the people that came with Jacob. So, and if you go to Exodus, I think it's right at the top, verse 1. Yeah, actually not verse 1, chapter 1, verse 5. Exodus chapter 1, verse 5. All the persons who came from the loins of Jacob were 70. So that 70 doesn't include Jacob. He didn't come from his own loins. We're 70 in number, but Joseph was already in Egypt. I've tried working out who the 70 are, and some Jews, I listen to what they say as well, of how they rationalize it as well. They come from, like, it's almost like a pure look at, a raw look, if you're just looking at the Old Testament, to listen to what the Jews say. Definitely, they don't have the New Testament, so that's very critical as well. So they would say, they wouldn't include necessarily, the ones I've heard at least, don't include Jacob in the 70, but they say God was the 70th. And you don't get that anywhere in the text. It's really quite confusing. This gets into the whole topic of the difference between the Masoretic and the Septuagint, which I touched on in the last video. The Masoretic, for those that aren't familiar, Masoretic came about, I think it was somewhere around 300 or 400 AD after Christ. That was for a long time, I believe that was like the only version of scripture that we had. Then we found some then we found some Septuagint. Might be wrong with some of the timing here though, but and then we found the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I think it was late 1900s, 70, 80, something like that. And so to do with that, I think an important thing with realizing that we do have the New Testament with us that the modern Jews don't realize. They go off of the Masoretic text. But if you look at, I gotta find it, I think it might be in Acts. So the author of Acts is Luke. So if you look in Luke, if we look in Acts, of whom Luke wrote, chapter 7, verse 14 says, "Then Joseph sent word and invited Jacob his father and all his relatives to come to him, 75 persons in all." So this is before the Masoretic. The Masoretic, like, it's for sure, it's confirmed. It was first, if you want to say, publicized in 300 or 400 AD. So this is before all that. The Septuagint is before the Masoretic. And even though it's a Greek translation of the Hebrew, it could very well be a more reliable interpretation. Definitely looking at the Hebrew is important because that's the original language. But I don't necessarily have the evidences with me here, so I won't be able to explain to you why I think the Masoretic in this area is less accurate. The Septuagint, I think, is correct with the 75. Essentially, it adds, well, like the 70 to 75, really it adds 5 more names, but it's actually 4 names. Oh man, I forget how that all worked. I figured it all out. I have a chart and everything. I've done tons and tons of spreadsheets about all this stuff. For the moment, for this video, I don't think it's necessary to go over, but the total of the 75, when considering Genesis chapter 46 and who is of that 75, it makes a lot more sense. Then when you get to the 66, that also makes a lot more sense, because if you think about it, sorry, got something in my throat. If you think about it, so 70 to 66, there's 4 missing there. So that would be Joseph, Manasseh, Ephraim, and then Hezron and Hamuel and Kohath. And yeah, so those 6, it's actually 6 there. But then if you consider 75 going to 66, you got 9. You got 9 available there. It's still the number 66 in the Septuagint. So in terms of who we know wasn't included in that, with that 66, the Masoretic doesn't make sense. The Septuagint makes sense there. There's a whole bunch of other reasons why people lean towards the Septuagint. Some of them I don't think are very good arguments, like saying that the lineage of Shem after the flood, it makes more sense because the lives are more gradually, with the Masoretic, it says that Shem was still alive when Abraham was born, which really I don't have a problem with. I've heard people give the argument that it needs to be a lot further along, that Shem wasn't alive when Abraham was. I don't know why. It just makes more sense to them, but I don't think that's a very good argument. Like things like that, like superficial things, that it could go either way, that's not evidence to me. Evidence to me is like what the early authors talk about, like Luke here. He quotes the 75, and even then, all the chronology of from creation till whatever time the author was writing, or till Jesus, all of them compare it, like the early authors before 300 or 400 AD, they're all quoting the Septuagint, or at least the numbers that are in the Septuagint. None of them refer to the Masoretic. And it's pretty much common knowledge, if you do a little bit of digging, that the Jews influenced the Masoretic. They made their own version. They changed the scriptures just because they didn't want Jesus as their Messiah. Man, there's a whole bunch of background stuff about that, but yeah, they and just kind of explain why that matters. That was confusing to me at first as well, but this isn't something scriptural, but it's something in their like extra biblical understanding, is that in the sixth, was it the sixth millennium from creation, they believe that that's when the Messiah would come. So then when you chart it out based on the Septuagint, it was in the sixth millennium. It was, if I have my numbers right, somewhere around 5,550 years by the time that Jesus came. Maybe 5,560. So, and I guess they just didn't like that, so they changed it to be more accurately to 4,174. And again, there's debate about that number, but that's the numbers I come to with intense study. It's not the 4,004 is what a lot of people say, and with James Ussher, and he popularized that. So, yeah, so then my reasoning for why those names are included then, I believe it's because when you look, and this is actually, I just realized this over the last week, because I've been writing about this. So since I did my last video, I really got inspired to start writing it down and really flesh out my thoughts. So I was thinking things like, here, I got a list here of like assumptions of guessing of why. So one thing is that maybe they're all pure blood Israelites, not being mixed with Egyptians. But that doesn't include Joseph's two sons. Like, because the mother was Egyptian, Asenath, I think was her name. Of like basically why the whole 70 are mentioned. Like, yeah, they're outside of the 66, but again, we got extra names there. Then another assumption is all those born prior to Jacob's death, and or born on his knees, which is a term. We see that where it's not exactly born on his knees, but with Manasseh and Ephraim, essentially Jacob adopted them later on when he put his hands on their head, but he actually had his hands crossed and he blessed them. That's the moment when he adopted them. At least that's how it is in that culture. But there are also births that came after, that are in that list, that came after the death of Jacob. So that's not possible. Which, yeah, again, I'm not going to go through all the little details here because I want to talk about the main parts. But maybe at another point or in my paper I can go into detail there. Let's see. I have another note here. Was it an attempt for some reason to have the amount of names be 70, regardless of how many actually entered Egypt? Now that's also a debate, because like 70 is repeated a lot throughout the scriptures. Like 70 names, I think it's Genesis chapter 10 of those, that the names of the families after the Tower of Babel. And then also in the New Testament, there's 70, the 70 that went out, that Jesus, I forget the exact story, but there's 70 that went out. I forgot the details, specific details about that. And I think there's, in the 70 weeks, David's 70 weeks, Daniel's 70 weeks, stuff like that. There's probably other 70s as well. So possibly, but it doesn't quite seem too likely like that's a possibility, or it could have just been happenstance. Were all the people actually born in Canaan, meaning they still traveled back and forth, or some came to Egypt later? Perhaps this can relate to Genesis 46 verse 26, which 46:26 is, let's see, I'm not even in the right book here. Genesis 46:26, that's when it talks about the 66 people. So I don't think so. It seems that when they moved, like there is sometimes where there are times where you hear them being in like Canaanite cities, but it's not typical. It's not common. I think even Hezron was in a Canaanite city, it says in a later story. But I'll get to the point of why I think those 70 are mentioned, is because when you get to Numbers chapter 26, it lists all the families like the of their father. Their father was like of the family of, like it breaks it down of even, so let's pick a name here. Well, let's do Judah. Why not? So it talks about the families of the Zerahites, which are the sons of Zerah, which also Perez and Hamul, or sorry, Hezron and Hamul are sons of. So there are also the Hezronites, which are Zerahites, but they're the ones that are born of Hezron specifically are referred to as Hezronites and Hamulites and whatever other sons that Zerah had. He did have others. But I think that's why that's relevant, because all of these names that are mentioned are very important for the time when they're in the wilderness, when Israelite is in the wilderness after the time of the Exodus, because those are the families. And it's basically Moses telling them their backstory, telling them their story and where they all came from. So, yeah, essentially, I think that's why. And I still got a bit of working on that, like to really figure it out, really nail it down. Because again, that's just over the last week I figured that out. I realized that. So, but I'm pretty sure that's accurate. So, one thing I said that I would touch on in the last video that I touch on in this video was if the math could really work out. So with if Kohath wasn't required to have been born before the move, even if he was born after with the age of Levi, could the 430 years still work? So the answer is yes, essentially though. But so like here, we need to work out the age of Levi. So Levi, I believe, was the third son. Let me double check that. Yeah, third son, the one just before Judah. So let's say, so if Judah was 40, what did we say, 44 at the time of the move to Egypt, then Levi would have been 45. So 45. We know that Levi lived to be 137. So 45, 137, that would be 82. So 82 years. And then let's assume that all of their sons and sons and sons were born after their father's death, just for an ultimatum, just to figure out the absolute maximum of time. I'm sorry, my voice. Good old Tim Hortons. I'm sorry if that's bothering people, but yeah, I appreciate you still listening to this video. So Levi, 45, I lived for 82 more years into the sojourn in Egypt. So 82 years. To my memory, Kohath lived to be 137. Did I do that right? 45. No, 133. Either way, it's either 133 or 137 for both Kohath and Amram, but I'm pretty sure Kohath is 133. I think that's what we figured out in the last video. So 133. Add 82 to that. So we got 115. Did I do my math right there? Let me double check just in case. We'll bring out the good old calculator. So 82 plus 133 equals 215. Of course, I missed 100 there. We'll keep the trusty calculator out here. We'll add another, Amram was 137. So add 137. We got 352, and then add 80 for Moses, 432. I think, did I do something wrong there? Because that seems actually pretty low. So 82 plus 133 plus 137 plus 80. 432. Okay, I thought there was a little bit more leeway in there. Maybe I'm missing a 137. Let's double check this. Oh my goodness. Okay, so Levi was 137 minus 45. 92. That's what it was. It wasn't 82. Okay, so yeah, there's like 12 years of leeway there. So we'll do the math again. Okay, 92 plus 133 plus 137 plus 80. 442. So we got an excess of 12 years. So, which isn't much, but it shows that it's possible. And that's not as unlikely as having kids at age 12. So that's like almost not even a thing, not even practical at all. So, because we know that a lot of the fathers had kids at their in their old age, like, so that would make it, let's say, roughly 4 years for each, 4 years before their death. So Levi would have had Kohath when he was 129. Kohath would have had Amram 129, no, sorry, 132. Kohath would have had Amram when he was 129, and Amram would have had Moses when he was 132. So those numbers, like, it would be old for a female, but not old for a male. Like Noah had kids at 500, and there's other people, like, yeah, you could quote Abraham having Isaac at age 100, but he even had more kids after that. So after Sarah's death. So it's not unusual, especially even at this time, to have kids in their old age past 100, 130, stuff like that. So it's just their lives were diminishing. So it was definitely possible and likely plausible. What was another thing that I was going to say? Oh yeah, so we could touch on Jochebed, the age of Jochebed. You know what? I'll make that the next video, and we'll touch on something else as well, because we're already at about 30 minutes. So yeah, so thanks guys for listening. Definitely comment down below if you guys have any questions, or if I've missed something. If there's like certain scriptures that I messed up on, or my math or whatever, just anything, let me know. Be reasonable. Be like, if you guys disagree with me, show me scripture verses and show me reasoning. Don't just say, oh, that's not possible. No, it has to be the with Abraham and such. Show me. Okay, we'll do it all in scripture, because that's really the thing that rules. It doesn't, our own mind doesn't rule us. We need to rule it. It's like, lean not on your own understanding, but in all ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. It's probably King James right there. That's how I remembered it. Okay, thanks guys, and thanks for listening, and thanks for yeah, thanks for everything. Take care.